This is the second part of the lecture for January 23rd, week number 4, Change, Conflict, and Crisis. We want to talk a little bit now about change itself and a model for embracing or adopting or creating change. I have provided in the assignment file a document called Kotter's 8-Step Model for Change, and I want to talk about that just a little bit with you here to explain its importance and to follow the steps. One of the best ways to understand how to make changes effectively are found in a model by John Paul Kotter. John Paul Kotter was a Konosuke Matsushita Professor of Leadership Emeritus at Harvard Business School, a New York Times best-selling author and the founder of the Kotter International. He is a well-known thought leader in the fields of business, and he has an excellent book called Leading Change, which you might want to own. I know that we use that in my DMIN study in this area. What I want you to look at with me are the 8 steps that are involved in change, because they're very important to our understanding of how the process works as we try to initiate or engage in change. Basically, his model follows 8 steps, and step 1 is to create urgency. For change to happen, it helps for the whole group to really want change to happen. And you need to develop a sense of urgency before you expect to have change occur. You need to develop a sense of urgency around the need for change. And this may spark that initial motivation with those innovators, but it's not simply a matter of showing people where you're failing and or talking about increasing the way that you can be successful. It really involves an open and honest dialogue. And Kotter, in the document that I've given you, outlines some of the things that you can do to achieve this. But Kotter really believes that for a change to be successful, 75% of the management or leadership group needs to buy into the change. In other words, you really have to work hard on step 1 and spend a lot of time in it. In fact, significant time building a sense of energy, urgency, before you can move on to any of the other steps. And this is where we fail. We often do not work hard enough to lay the groundwork. Step 2, he says, is to form a powerful coalition. You need to convince people that change is necessary, and that often takes strong leadership on your part and visible support for some key people within your group, because managing change is not enough. You actually have to lead change. You can be effective change leaders throughout your group, but they don't necessarily, you may have effective change leaders about your group, but they may not necessarily follow the traditional hierarchy. You may find that you have some opinion makers in your group that may not be officials in the job, but those opinion leaders will be able to help this process along. And then third, you really need to create a compelling vision for change. When you first start looking at change, there are probably many great ideas and solutions that float around about it, and you need to link those concepts, however, always to the overall thing that you're trying to achieve. And then the directives that grow from that tend to make more sense. But there has to be a vision for change. And then the 4th step is you need to communicate that vision itself, that vision out of which the change is required. So you talk about your vision often. You open and honestly address people's concerns and anxieties. You apply your vision to all aspects of operations, from training to performance and to evaluation. You always tie everything back to the vision, but most of all, you walk the talk. You lead by example in a change. You also then come to step 5, which is where you have identified the obstacles and you begin to remove those obstacles. If you follow the steps and reach this point in the change process, you're going to be talking about things that are beginning to come up where you see resistance to change. You may see processes that get in the way of change. You may need to see things about your structure that get in the way of change. And so you are continually checking for the barriers to change and removing those obstacles so that you can empower people to make those things work. One of the things I have found in removing obstacles is often a church council is an obstacle to change because they are too much into command and control. They want to tell people what to do and they want to control what people do, as opposed to giving permission to people to explore, to experiment, and even to fail if they have to. Another essential area is to create short-term wins. Short-term wins that you can celebrate, because nothing motivates more than success. So you don't simply have change and never talk about it, or simply talk about it when there's a problem. You need to tell the stories of when the change is working. And you also need to find ways for people to see immediate and tangible results so that they can believe that the change is worth the effort. And step 7, he says, is always to continue to build on the change. Many change projects fail because victory is declared too early. You try to say, oh, we've arrived, when you really have not quite arrived, pardon me, because real change always runs deep. Quick wins are only the beginning of what needs to be done to achieve things. So what you can do is after every win, you analyze what went right and what needs to be improved. You set goals that continue to build on the momentum that you've achieved. You learn ways to do continuous improvement, and you're always looking for fresh ideas to make the change richer. And then you want to change. Step 8 is you anchor the change into the culture of the church. Finally, to make the change stick, it has to become a part of the core of the way you operate your organization. Your church culture often determines what gets done. And so I'm going to say that if you want to be an outward-focused church, one of the things you have to do is to create a structure and a process by which evangelism and mission and things that serve the people outside become a primary tool and goal that you have or value that you pursue as a group. You can read Cotter in detail, and I hope that you will. It's not a very long document, but in many ways, if you understand how change works and how to manage change, particularly with people, one like my person in the council who wants to change too quickly, or to overcome the gas pedal, great brake pedals in your church, you will find Cotter very, very useful. Remember, change is a constant. We cannot eliminate or ignore it, but by God's grace and His help, we can manage it. Let's talk a little bit more about maintaining the unity of the Spirit and bond of peace. There are proactive things that you have to keep in mind as a leader to help manage the emotional and physical and relational health of the body and decrease the conflict potential within the church. Because remember, when a church is healthy, it is more inclined to change and to deal with its challenges. One of the things that you need to remember is burnout and busyness. Have you looked at your church calendar lately? I don't mean yours as the leader, I mean the church's. How many times do you call people to be into the church? How many expectations do you have of them every weekend? Some churches make the mistake of having something special planned, either a fundraiser or a training event, or even just a fellowship event every weekend of the month. People have to have some downtime as well. Have you looked also at the calendars of your church leadership? There are only 7 24-hour days a week, 168 hours in the week, and 56 need to be used for sleep for healthy people. So check out people's calendars. Do not simply create new things to do without understanding that busyness will lead to burnout. You also need to remember that not everything is important. You don't need to do everything, and you don't need to sweat the small stuff. You don't need to do everything, and you don't need to sweat the small stuff. Another principle that you want to keep in mind is that people are always more important than programs. We have sacred programs, which Bill Leeson might call sacred cows. But Bill Leeson says sacred cows make a gourmet hamburger. Not a bad idea. Because sometimes the program becomes so critical and so important that you forget that there are people involved in it and that people have needs that cannot be ignored. In fact, people have needs to serve that cannot be ignored. One church I knew became so obsessed with the excellence of its VBS and that it did not really allow new people to be a part of the VBS staff because the same staff had done it for so long and they did it so well, and they didn't want the project to deteriorate in any way that they would not let new people join the group. You always want to build consensus in the church whenever you can. I had one church council president who, when we came to a decision-making time, would say, we're going to pray about it before we make a decision. And if God tells you something that we have not yet heard, we need to hear it. But I need to tell you that if we don't have consensus or almost consensus on an issue, we have not prayed about it or explored it enough. Now, I know that there are roadblock people who will always object to something, but you need to work harder to make sure that as many people are on board as possible. Which means you need to know who are the brake pedals in your church and who are the gas pedals, and you plan how to use them or deal with them as the process moves forward. Sometimes the brake pedals are people who just want to make sure that you've done it in the right way. And so you pay attention to the process for them. There are other people who are gas pedals. They just want to do the right thing, but they can sometimes step on the gas and run over something in front of them. You want to make sure that we do the right things in the right way. And then, of course, part of the way you build the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace is to be constantly praying for one another. I know several church boards now that have what they call prayer triads, where the people of the council are divided into groups where they regularly meet and pray with each other through the week as they serve together.